We'd like to open with a short prayer for unity. And for that, I'll call on one of our hosts tonight, Patty Kubala. Patty?
Nancy. Thank you. Oh my God, unite the hearts of thy servants and reveal unto them thy great purpose. May they follow thy commandments and abide in thy law. Help them, O God, in their endeavor, and grant them strength to serve thee. O God, leave them not to themselves, but guide their steps by the light of thy knowledge, and cheer their hearts with thy love. Verily, thou art their helper and their Lord.
Thank you again for joining us. And now I'd like to introduce Tom Kubala, who will share just a little background on the faith, and then we'll introduce our speaker for the evening. Tom?
Hi, everybody. Welcome. As we did 2 weeks ago, we read this short quote, and I'll read it again. Throughout history, God has sent to humanity a series of divine educators known as manifestations of God, whose teachings have provided the basis for the advancement of civilization. These manifestations have included Abraham, Krishna, Zoroaster, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, and Muhammad. Baha'u'llah, the latest of these messengers, explained that the religions of the world come from the same source and are, in essence, successive chapters of one religion from God. Baha'is believe the crucial need facing humanity is to find a unifying vision of the future of society and of the nature and purpose of life. Such a vision unfolds in the writings of Baha'u'llah. So we're delighted to have Beverlee Pattonallen with us this evening. Beverlee lives in Cedarburg and is part of our Cedarburg Baha'i community. We're so happy that she's here. She joins us from various places of the world. And it's always nice to have a world traveler, a world citizen be in our midst. And she adds so much to our community life. Beverlee is a certified heart math coach and author of fiction and nonfiction. She grew up in San Francisco. Her academic background is in modern dance education and international program management, serving in Grenada, India, Nepal, and Namibia. The Baha'i faith, she says, has been the guiding star throughout her life. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Beverlee.
Thank you. It's lovely to be with you, friends. And I would just like to share with you this evening some ideas that I've been thinking about lately. A question is, how do our individual heart qualities affect social justice in the system of governance? A society
Beverlee, you're breaking up.
Are you okay? What shall I do?
Ah, there you are, but you're back again.
Okay.
Just try it again.
I was saying that a society defined and structured, as I was saying, on the basis of who's in and who's out, who has power and who does not, who's protected by the law and who is not, is a society that is profoundly unjust. A society in which its laws and human behaviors contradict each other, that society is unjust. That is the quality of the society in which we now live. Baha'u'llah, whose revelation gave us the divine design for social justice for all peoples, raised these questions. How long will humanity persist in its waywardness? How long will injustice continue? How long is chaos and confusion to reign amongst society? How long will discord agitate the face of society? And we ponder those words, we ponder those questions, and we wonder, when will change come? Social justice is usually a legal reference. It refers to the laws and rules of society. It also commonly refers to the intention of correcting inherently unjust systems. Social justice activists are usually working to shift the balance of power, challenging the power structure, to open the way for those who are left out, who are powerless, who are unprotected by law. I just want to take a pause here and recommend to you a series on TV called Amend, referring to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. It's currently streaming on Netflix. It refers to the 14th Amendment, who is protected under law. And it describes social justice and injustice issues in the United States as applied to Native peoples of color, to LGBT, to women's rights, and gender parity. As history shows, acting for social justice can be life-threatening. Those divine educators, those manifestations of God, as Tom mentioned, of every universal religion, gave their lives for social justice. The latest of those, Baha'u'llah, accused of a crime he did not commit, was thrown into a dark, pestilential pit beneath Tehran, where he languished for 4 months. And then he was a prisoner for another 40 years. His activism for world peace, for the tranquility and prosperity and equality and unity of all people, his proclamation that all people are one and must be justly treated. Those actions of his were deadly threatening to the power structure of the kings and rulers and clergy of the 19th century. And before him, the Bab, known as the Gate, the forerunner of Baha'u'llah, had been murdered by the bullets of 850 army rifles for proclaiming the cause of justice for all peoples. Since 1844, Baha'is around the world have been activists for social justice and allies for those who are left out. Their activism on an international scale has not been in the form of protest in the streets, but rather in the form of community building from the grassroots up, behaving in a manner befitting people of justice, and children, youth, and adults, learning the process to become resources for the development of their communities, to bring justice and equity and gender parity to all communities. And Baha'u'llah revealed that the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom, if thou desirest me, and neglect it not that I may confide in thee. By its aid, thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily, justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes. And I've been thinking about that phrase, ponder this in thy heart. To ponder is an act of intelligence. To ponder in thy heart tells me that the heart has intelligence. All the holy scriptures tell of the heart as the seat of positive attitudes and emotions and feelings. The extensive research and discovery of the heart's intelligence is what I call science catching up with religion. I have an idea that one of the ways it behooves us to be is empathetic. Think of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. That is not the exact quote. But empathy, I believe, is an positive heart attitudes such as love and compassion and courage and caring are attitudes of the heart. And I'm focusing right now particularly on empathy, because I think that the ability to know what another person feels is required to be an ally for others who are left out, without power, who live their lives in relation to the in power. Can this process be reversed? It begins, I believe, with an empathetic attitude by those in power and by those at the grassroots, and that's us, activists for social justice, might have courage and compassion, which is expressed through being able to empathize with the plight of others who suffer from injustices. I have a personal story. As a young African-American woman, having taught school in California for 4 years, I received the John Hay Whitney Fellowship Dance Award for postgraduate study at Juilliard School of Music in New York. So late summer, I boarded a plane for New York. My oldest friend, who happened to be white and blonde-haired, her name was Becky, had preceded me a month earlier from San Francisco, and she'd rented an apartment in Greenwich Village, which I would share with her until the scheduled time for me to be admitted into the international dorm near Juilliard. From the airport, we taxied into Manhattan to our apartment, and where I left my luggage, which contained everything I would need for a year. Arye, a New York friend of Becky's, came, and we walked to one of the Greenwich Village restaurants. After eating, walking back to our apartment, we reached a corner and saw, to our amazement, that all of my luggage had been left out on the corner curb. Becky, finding that her key didn't work at the front door of the 2-story apartment building, began to yell for the super, who did not respond. You may know that a super in New York means the manager of an apartment building. My remembered image of the scene was Becky yelling and screaming for the super, people next door and across the street sitting in silence, watching us from their apartment stoops. Arye had the presence of mind to hail a taxi, get me and Becky and my luggage inside, and take us to his apartment across town. I had 2 allies that night. Just think if I had been alone in New York and my luggage had been put out on the street and I could not get into an apartment that had been rented. Those allies, I believe, had some thought of how I felt, and they took care of it. I spent the year dancing and studying at Juilliard. I also volunteered and took low-paying part-time jobs with civil rights and peace organizations. It was the civil rights era of the 20th century America. We did our bit up north while watching committed activists in the South trampled and beaten by dogs and washers and jailed for want of their right vote, to attend schools of choice, to sit where they pleased on public transportation and in buildings and restaurants. I had heard Martin Luther King Jr. listen to Malcolm X speak streets of Manhattan. Both of those great 20th century thinkers and social justice activists were assassinated during that decade. I knew how dangerous activism for social justice was in the 60s and still is. By the end of my fellowship year, I had become a Baha'i activist, convinced that only with the belief in and action towards realization of the oneness of humankind could justice truly reign on earth. A year had passed. It was time for me to return to San Francisco, where I would take a new position with the Performing Arts Workshop. But first, I wanted to say goodbye to my New York friends. I threw a party. I had a loft apartment. And in those days, among my group of friends, a party meant dancing and card playing. My guests were a sophisticated group of peace activists, of new Baha'i friends, of Black and white men and women. There were drinks, but very little alcohol and no drugs and no pot. We were an ethnically diverse group of activists and artists, but we were not into mind-bending substances. We had other things to do. Sometime around midnight, there was a heavy knock on the door. Inquiring whose apartment it was. I hardly remembered what happened before or after I was dragged downstairs, shoved into a police car, taken to the police local precinct. I was not handcuffed, but treated roughly and pushed down onto a bench in the front office. And as they had begun to interrogate me, one of the party guests, Michael, entered. He was the one who then began asking the questions. What proof do you have of any wrongdoing? He insisted I be released. Michael was white, a civil rights lawyer, and he had a car. Who in our age drove a car in New York City? Michael had used his white privilege to jump into his car, follow the cops, get me out of jail, drive me back to my apartment, where all the party attendees who earlier had been grooving to music or playing bid whist and rummy were still there, silently waiting in the dark. I later learned that as soon as I was taken by the police, Michael had told the party guests who wanted to leave to go out then with him. Those who wanted to stay, he said, should turn out the lights and wait quietly. It turned out that everyone had waited in the dark, quietly, not knowing what would happen. Michael told us that the police had accused me of running a gambling den and selling pot, but with absolutely no evidence of either. It was really the vision of Black and white young people partying together that had incensed a neighbor enough to call the police. It was not only Michael's white privilege, his intelligence, his legal training, but it was also his empathy that had caused him to act so quickly on my behalf. It takes empathy to be an ally. Empathy is a heart quality. What would this world be like if the critical mass of the world's population developed the heart quality of empathy? How might justice reign in this world? Martin Luther King said, "We refuse to believe that the bank of justice is bankrupt." Theodore Parker wrote in 1883, about the same time that Baha'u'llah was in that pestilential pit. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And remember that Baha'u'llah said, ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily, justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness. Empathy is a quality of our heart that we might ponder. I invite you to join me in setting our heart's intention towards justice. Remembering when it was and how you felt empathy for someone, especially someone different from you. You can do this heart practice with me, or simply take a moment to consider, what does empathy mean to you? And those of you who wish, I invite you to think about where your heart is, in your chest. Take your mind's focus into that place. Imagine that your breath is flowing in and out of that heart place, remembering what it feels like to feel empathy for another. And I invite you to think about those questions, which will lead us into our discussion. And I think Tom will repeat them again. And it really is a pleasure to be with you. And I'm really eager to hear your thoughts on this matter. Thank you. Oh,
Thank you so much, Beverlee. Thank you for your wonderful presentation and the thought-provoking ideas. We'll open the floor for discussion and for any questions or thoughts that you have following the presentation, things that may have come to you in those few moments. We ask that you remain muted until or unless you're called upon, and you can indicate that you have a question or a comment by either just raising your hand in front of your camera, or if you have an electronic device where you can go into the electronic hand raise signal through the chat,
yeah.
the chat menu, you can use that as well. Tom has a view of everybody, which neither Beverlee nor I have. So he will do his best to keep the questions straight and call on us, or call on you if you are interested in participating. So we'll just raise your hand now.
Oh, Patty, sorry. Go ahead.
There's some prejudice in the room here. I was an educator. I feel like I'm always an educator, but I'm thinking especially about children, and how do we foster empathy, not in children, but obviously not just children. I wonder if you have specific thoughts about that.
Patty, were you directing that to Beverlee specifically or to the group?
I was to Beverlee, but to the whole group, and I noticed Judy had her hand up.
Beverlee, go ahead.
Oh, let Judy
Okay,
proceed,
go ahead.
and then
Judy.
I'll follow. If that's
There was a lot of role playing when I was in school. Um, we took different roles, and if there was ever a conflict, and this was a public school in the country, if there was ever a conflict, part of the resolution of this conflict, even if there had been fisticuffs, was a conversation with the teacher about how do you think the other person felt, or why was the other person doing this. And it was just part of the way I was brought up. And I didn't understand that other people didn't know that for a long, long time. Walking in another person's shoes is how we resolved issues when I was in grade school. And my father, oh my gosh, when we were talking about World War II, he'd say to me, now you remember that there are kids on the other side shooting guns at our kids, and they haven't any choice, just like ours don't have any choice. And it seems to me there has to be an atmosphere and an acceptance of understanding that we have to walk in other people's shoes. We don't have to agree with them, and we don't have to be them, but we have to somehow figure out where they're coming from. And I don't know what we do with our children, Patty, except do that. And of course, that may be a problem for one person's philosophy or another family's religion. I don't know, but it seems to me brotherhood and walking in another person's shoes are what we need to do.
Thank you, Judy. Beverlee?
oh well, I absolutely agree, and I think we do ever is in our environment and I wanted our sons, I wanted our to be exposed to other worldviews and other ways of life. And we went to the extreme of going to another country, like the West Indies and India, and where they were exposed to so many different kinds of people. And I know that I see them as adults, that it just opened their worldview. And because we saw each other all on as one humanity, I think they gained empathy through that exposure. So that, I think that's one of the ways, is that as parents teach to expose our children to others, ways of life, ethnicity, whatever is available to us. But I think that's one of the ways in which we educate for empathy. The other question that was I think we might want to consider is what would it look like if the critical mass of people had that quality of empathy towards each other? What would our governance look like? What would the systems look like? What would the education and all the systems of governments look like? That's a huge question, but something to just begin to think about if you feel like discussing that.
Nancy, you had your hand up.
Yes, and what I was thinking about is kind of related to that question, Beverlee. Patty had asked, how do we teach our children? But I was thinking about, how do we help adults arrive at empathy? You know, when we look around at what's happening in the, well, all over the world. In our country, it seems to be primarily, you know, an awful lot is focused on racism, but in other places there may be casteism or other isms that are more at the heart of social unrest. But when you look at social media in particular, you know, there's just, there are people preaching to the choir, and there are people pointing fingers, and it seems like, you know, where there is a lack of empathy in the adults who are in social media anyway, they're not social media or those kinds of, that kind of finger pointing and so forth. It's not going to make anybody change their position. So how do you help people arrive at a place of empathy if they've never learned it, you know, as they've grown up? Because the decision makers, the adults, are the ones who have to make the laws and the rules and the you know, create the support systems and so forth. So we need for the adults to be empathetic. And so aside from just imagining what that would be like, it's my question is, how do we help someone become empathetic? And I don't think it's by pointing the finger at how bad they're being.
That's right.
I think it has to do with relationships. That whole idea of oneness has to extend beyond oneness with the people that I already feel oneness with. It has to extend to people that I may disagree with. I have to be willing to embrace and love even people that where I just can't get inside their head to understand where they're coming from, you know. But I mean, I think it goes beyond that, but for me, that's a start. But I would love to have other ideas.
Patty.
Something that's coming to my mind are the words investigate and explore. You know, I've seen teachers who are, you know, very didactic. It's just like, this is what we're going to learn, or this is how it is, you know, and not just teachers, you know, parents, whatever. And I think a quality, a couple of qualities that are really important would be exploring, being an exploring kind of a person. Investigating, that's another good way to put it, where we encourage ourselves. I mean, because we still, at whatever age we're at, we have a lot of things to still learn. And, but again, I'm always usually thinking of children or groups. I'm thinking of Bridge the Divide. Those of us that live in Cedarburg get exposed to a lot of that kind of like, investigate for yourself, explore, you know, expose yourself to differences. And I feel like there's a lot of the opposite of that going on, or maybe there's lack of parenting at all, or not just lack of parenting, but maybe lack of teachers or educators who are, you know, encouraging an investigative discovery kind of thing.
Linda, do you have your hand up or your thumb or whatever that is?
I think it's my thumb, yes.
Okay.
Oh, Beverlee, thank you so much. That was so lovely to hear your presentation, and how sad it was to hear the story that you shared. I really appreciated, though, how you brought out the fact that you had people that were empathetic and strong enough, brave enough to step in. And that gives me hope, because I think that's something that many of us, or all of us, can really do, is to be brave and to step in. One of the things that I did when I was in the working world, many of you might know about the Virtues Project, and the Virtues Project has definitions for all the different virtues. And they're not religious based, they're
Moral.
I don't know, they're
Moral.
based, yes. And I worked for a very large corporation, United Healthcare, and at one point I had an opportunity to motivate my team is what I was supposed to do. And so I started making copies of those virtues, and empathy happens to be one of them. But I was able to introduce those into the workplace, and it really helped. And it also brought strength to other people who then could use them in their work with their with the people. So I just mentioned that it's a little tiny thing, but it's a common ground that we all can have.
Thank you, Linda. Fierce, you had your hand up.
Yes. I was taught and shown empathy throughout my childhood growing up. I watched my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and my parents model empathy for me and my sister and I. So when it's modeled for you as a child, you carry those qualities with you as an adult, and hopefully you will transfer those everywhere you go. I even noticed that when I became a parent, I modeled those same wonderful qualities in my two sons. And they took that same model and used it amongst their friends. So I was told by a parent of a situation that happened at school. Also a situation that happened later on. And it was wonderful to see how young at the time my son was, and he was able to handle it in that way. And this was told to me by a teacher, and I was thankful. And later on, when my son got into high school, he ran into a situation where a group of kids, they were in the car together, and like Beverlee had a situation, he had the same situation. So he was singled out amongst all his peers that were in the car. And he took the empathy way of dealing with the situation. And because he took that model at that time, it transferred to the other peers that were in the car, because they went back and explained to their parents what happened, and they began to have more empathy because they witnessed firsthand, not just hearsay or reading in a book. So, and then throughout their life growing up, I would take them with me. I worked in a program shortly after I moved here down in Milwaukee, and it was a summer program. And I was director, and I had about 40 kids. We had 40 kids, give or take. We had one nurse that was on staff and a few other staff members that helped. One of the things that was constantly modeled was empathy, and just touching these young kids. Like a lot of times the kids would cry or have tears, and just to go over and model, take and hold that kid or give them a tissue to wipe their tears. The other children would watch and learn how, just by modeling little simple things as that. A kid would fall down, hurt their knee or arm. I would say to the kid, go and get the nurse, if the nurse was inside the building, if we're on the playground. But in the meantime, having the other kids take and hold the other kid's hand, and say, it's gonna be all right. Calm the nerves, calm the fear, but you're showing all this empathy. And so when they go back to their home that afternoon or wherever it may be, they learn how to be more empathetic towards their sisters or brother, more kind. But I was always constantly modeling that approach, and also reinforcing that amongst my staff members. How can we better, show kindness, no matter what background you come from, what economics you come from? Because I ran into a young lady who came through the program, and she stopped me, and I didn't even recognize her. And she says, I want to thank you. She says, because I have graduated from college. I went through certain circumstances in my life, and because of that kindness and empathy and the love that I showed, made her get through her trials and tribulation as she was going through college and until her adulthood. So you never know how you touch someone's life.
Somebody, yes. Yes. Thank you, please.
Patty.
I'm sorry.
And what are you sorry? Carry on.
Blah, blah, blah. What has come up when Thierse was talking, and then also earlier, is the importance of language. And somebody here mentioned the Virtues Project. Oh, that was Linda. And I was very involved in the Virtues Project myself and was trained. And I remember I had a group of women, and Nancy was part of that group too. We met every Wednesday for years. I mean, like 7 years maybe. And at some point, we discovered these virtues, the Virtues Project, and these virtues cards. So we did activities with these virtue cards. And it's amazing. Oh, she's showing you them.
I don't see
Humanity. Yes, like strength. But just learning to use language and modeling the use of language of virtues, or whatever you want to call them, but these human qualities that make all the difference in the world. And because I had a group of women with whom we could practice, I mean, we actually practice, because you don't think to use that kind of language unless you practice it. So we did practice this, and those of us who still had children at home, we practiced on our kids, and it really did make a difference. And so if we really want to have, a more workable society, a world that actually works, we all need to work on this, vast array of qualities, these virtues. And it's really pretty simple. As long as you have a plan, right? It's like, I
Mhm.
want to do this. And then you have to
Mhm.
remember to keep doing it, just like
Mhm.
any habit that we
Mhm.
develop.
Mhm.
Judy.
We have, all of us here have been brought up to or have practiced empathy or virtues or qualities. I think in terms of social justice, however, that's a much bigger problem and a much bigger situation. Part of which I believe is that each of us has to understand who we are and where we are coming from in our ideas of each other,
Mhm.
and then and learn about others. Yes, it's great if you can live in another culture. I've always felt that even in the United States, if you travel from one place to another, you need to spend 6 months there to understand that community. And I've had the opportunity to live in quite a few other cultures. It takes more though. What are we going to do today? Social injustice is so predominant in many areas. Here we are all aware and mortified when we hear about problems. So how do we go forward? Part of it is changing laws, but much of it is just having recognition in communities, and how do we bring that along? For me, it's understanding that I am a product of white privilege in this case. For other people, it might be something else, and I have to learn and understand what that is, forgive myself for that, and not practice it. But what is it for everybody else, and what is it for our laws and our country? I don't know. That's the question. Where do we get justice?
Mhm. Robert.
Thank you, Tom. Well, Beverlee, thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation. I also lived in the West Indies. We'd love to visit about that sometime. I lived on the island of St. Kitts and had many dear friends the time I was there. You know, friends, every point has been so appreciated. But there is no power outside of the love of God. We live in a, and Beverlee, I'm bringing this up so you will address it in length.
Mhm.
But you know, friends, this reminds me of the conversation I hear outside. We talk about everything about except love of God and obedience to God. Why in the world did Christ come? It was to transform our hearts. Why in the world did Baha'u'llah come, or Muhammad or Buddha? It was to transform our hearts.
That's right.
There is no way I'm going to have empathy for anyone if I don't have a love for my Creator. And when Baha'u'llah says we're leaves of one tree, I can't have the energy for that unless I have a love for God. When I was not a Baha'i, thank God I got it from my mother, but it wasn't like Baha'u'llah gave it to me. And Beverlee, I wonder if you might address this, because a couple of weeks ago, we had a conversation about this. We are afraid to mention the word God in our society.
Mhm.
We are afraid to give him the credit, and nothing will change until we humble ourselves before our Creator. And then what happens, that love of God, now Beverlee and I and Tom and I, Jim and Judy and I, we're brothers and sisters. Love means something very different. It's easy to love. We're in the same family. So Beverlee, I'm bringing this up as a springboard for you, please.
Baha'u'llah revealed in Christ before him that earth and heaven cannot contain me. What alone can contain me is the heart of him that believeth in me and is steadfast in my cause. So this is so true. I agree with you, Robert. It's in the scriptures. Who am I to agree with you? Yes, indeed. We start with the love of God, and that is a heart quality. He has taken our hearts, and that's where we begin to understand what the revelation of God really is. It's from our heart quality. And the expression of developing our families, raising our children, and having friends. Having friendship is a relation building, like Nancy was talking about, that we get to practice the qualities. And we need to extend our friendships and extend our relationships. We're in a state now, Judy, you mentioned you don't know where we start, but you really do know where we start, because we start with community building. We start with building relationships. And you're so right. Comes from the love of God, from our heart to your heart. And it's that expression of our love of God that we feel love for each other through our hearts. And as we, like Thies said, as we model these qualities of empathy and courtesy and kindness, and that extends in our communities, and we invite others in, and we are in a community building state. That's how we change the world from injustice to justice, is by building communities through the love of God. And so thank you, Robert, for bringing that up. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Thies. Thank you, Peggy and Nancy. I was wondering if there anyone else who would like to speak before we conclude. Tom, I turn it over to you.
All right. We're just going to make a plug for the next two speakers. Our own Manijeh Khorshidi, who has joined, who was part of tonight's discussion, will be presenting how does an understanding of history contribute to our spiritual growth. And that will be on April 9th, Friday evening, April 9th. And then 2 weeks later, on April 23rd, our dear son, Everett, and his wife, Nadia, will be talking about community building. They have an intimate relationship with George Floyd Square, because the Baha'i Center in Minneapolis is a half a block from George Floyd Square. And Everett, in particular, has had a daily interaction with the community that's evolving around that tragic event. So both of these talks will be, I think, very intriguing.
Thank you.
So, and then meanwhile, if you'd like to learn more about the Baha'i faith, you can certainly ask any of the Baha'is that you know or who are here tonight any old time. We're pretty transparent. If you don't personally know any Baha'is to connect to, or that you feel comfortable asking things of, then you can find information on any aspect of the faith at all at www.baha'i.org. If you're interested in gathering with Baha'is or others for prayers or devotions or for study groups, or if you know some children who might want to participate in character building classes, you should feel free to contact Patty Kubala, or you can contact me as well. My number's not up there, but if you know me or ask a Baha'i, you can find me easily. And other than that, we thank you so much again, Beverlee. Thank you to all of the participants. We thank you for coming and thank you for sharing. And we hope to see you again next time. Good night, everyone.
Thank you all.
very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you all. Yes.
Thank you, Beverlee.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. It
Thank-
was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very
Thank you very
much.
much.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody. Good night.
Good
Night.
night.
Good night.
See you soon.
Mm.